أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. There's a verse in the Quran in Surah Al-Hujurat. Allah starts that surah by saying, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, la tuqaddimu bayna yaday Allahi wa rasulih, wattaqullah, inna Allah sami'un alim. This verse is speaking about the etiquette that people were supposed to observe with the Prophet. One of the things that they were advised to do was, or I should say the other way, they were prohibited from doing, was for being presumptuous with the Prophet. Right? Taqaddum, or this taqdeem to the Prophet and Allah, is to step before them, to be presumptuous with them, to have a kind of disrespect for them, where you act before they say to act, or you finish their sentence for them, or you're presumptuous with them. You think you know more than them, and you start acting or speaking or whatever before they either give you permission or they tell you to act. So that was one of the problems that was there in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he and it seems like it was a recurring theme that he wouldn't speak up for himself. When it came to personal issues and people were personally disrespectful to him, he wouldn't say something. He wouldn't say, don't do that. Allah would step in and say, the Prophet's shy to tell you this, but this I'm going to tell you. And so Allah sends this is one of those kinds of verses where Allah steps in and says, don't do this to your Prophet. Right? Don't step in front of him. We have a hadith that we can put with this verse, and the hadith says that al-ulama warathatul anbiya. The scholars in this ummah are, in a sense, heirs to the prophets. Right? Not in the sense of inheriting wealth and these kinds of things, but in terms of the knowledge that the prophets had brought. Right? Their job was to teach, to bring guidance from Allah, to receive that wahi from Allah, the revelation from Allah. After the prophets are gone, after the awsiya are gone, then it's the job of the ulama, the scholars, to carry on that mission and to continue to disseminate knowledge, continue to try to show people how to implement knowledge, to model it for people, and like that. So if that respect is due for the Prophet, then it's also due for the scholars. Not to the same extent, because of course the Prophet is the Prophet, the Imams are in their own place, the scholars are nothing compared to them. But in the sense that they are carrying the mantle of that Prophet, they deserve that same sort of respect. I bring this up for the purpose of this. There are some interactions, this isn't specific to the incident that happened yesterday, but there are interactions that I've experienced in the community, both this time and also last time I came, which I felt crossed the line of between respect and disrespect. And at first I thought it was just a personal thing. It was something that I was doing wrong. Maybe I was commanding respect or something. So I assumed it was just a personal thing, and I just kept on ignoring it. But then after, I came to know that it wasn't a personal thing. It's a recurring theme in the community. Other speakers, other scholars who have come have also experienced similar things. And so I realized this is something I need to stand up and actually speak about and address you concerning, because it's an akhlaqi point that you need to know, and you need to realize that this is not acceptable. I think part of the problem is perhaps some of you don't understand what a scholar is. And again, I'm not speaking as a person. As a person, I can put up with a lot. But once I put on this uniform, and I'm standing as somebody who's studying the Hawza, and I come to you in this capacity, then I'm not speaking for myself anymore. I have a bigger role to play. The scholars who devote their lives to studying Islam, they are people who have made great sacrifices and people who have devoted an immense amount of their time and their energy to try to learn the deen. And the purpose the reason why they do this, part of it is personal, that they want to learn themselves, they have a passion for learning themselves. But as soon as we learn, then we immediately also have the duty to teach. And we have to fulfill this role of filling this void of Islamic education in our communities. So it's an incredibly important role, and Allah has, time and time again, through the Quran, especially through ahadith, the Imams have narrated a lot of different ahadith about scholars, and about knowledge, and those who pursue knowledge, those who have knowledge, and the importance and the role of scholars in our community. For this very purpose, that they are the backbones of our community. In the absence of our Imam, even in the presence of the Imam, in fact, when the Imams were there, what we see in Islamic history was that the Imam, we sometimes, I think, have a misconception that the Imams were everything, meaning every kind of act of teaching that occurred while the Imam was alive was a direct communication. The Imam would speak to everyone. And it definitely was not the case. The Imams were the source, but they had students around them who they trained for years and years and years, who studied with them intensely, and then the Imams would very wisely and conscientiously send these students out to do different functions. They would send them as their representatives, their wakils, to different parts of the Muslim lands, to collect taxes, to teach people, to be a liaison between the people and the Imam. And so these scholars, even in the times of the Imams, played a great role. And certainly in the absence of the Imam, everything's left to the scholars, to the mujtahideen first and foremost, the ones who are jurists at the highest levels of scholarship, but also to lower level scholars who may not be jurists, but are still people who have studied properly in the hawza. So part of the problem might be that you don't understand what a scholar is and what a scholar has done, and this particular teaching that we have, that scholars are due a certain respect that other people, a certain special respect. I'll leave it at that. Now, let me just give you again, it's just a little sample of some of the different things that are required in terms of our interactions with scholars. One, for instance, is when you ask questions, right? One of the things I've tried to do, because I see myself as a teacher, one of the things I like to do is to have a dialogue and kind of talk back and forth, and so I really encourage questions. That's why we do the question and answer. So yesterday's session I thought went really well in terms of helping me to make sure that I've communicated correctly and that you also don't leave with any misconceptions. So I think that was very good in that way. But in general, the etiquette of asking questions is there's a hadith of Imam Ali alayhi salam that kind of sums it up. He says, "Sal tafaqquhan wa la tasal ta'annutan." Right, so when you ask questions, certainly ask, but the intention and the goal of asking the question should be tafaqquh, to seek understanding. Right, so you ask a question, you ask it humbly, you ask it with an open mind, thinking, you have an answer, I need the answer, please teach me. I don't understand, I don't know, and give me something so I can increase my understanding. That should be the intention. وَلَا تَسَلْ تَعَنُّتًا. Don't ask for other sorts of purposes. Sometimes people ask to try to pin you down, for instance. They already know the answer, or they think they know the answer, and they want to see what's he going to say. Let me ask him the question just to test, just to see if he's as smart as I am, if he knows as much as I do. And that's one of the intentions sometimes people have when they ask questions. Sometimes it's to embarrass the person. They'll ask, maybe they did some research, they know something. They'll let me see if he can answer the question that I know the answer to, and let's make a fool of him and do that. Right, so people have different kinds of intentions sometimes for which they ask questions. Those are unacceptable. The reason for questioning should be to discover knowledge that you don't have, to clarify things that you have misunderstandings about. One of the things I kind of specifically have seen over and over again is people have, I wonder, your dynamic with your professors in college, for instance, your dynamic with your boss at work, people who are kind of your superiors in a worldly sense, in the worldly hierarchies that we have. And would you have the gall to kind of come and tell them, I think you should have done this differently, right? You did your job, but you should have done it this way, you should have done it that way. I think your speech wasn't, you could have added this, you could have added that, you should have said this, you should have said that. I've gotten this actually many times in this community, right? I welcome engagement on the level of the topic itself. The content that I'm giving you, If there's anything that you see that's inconsistent with something else, absolutely ask me that. Say, I thought we had this particular teaching, or I read this verse, and what you said seems to be different. How do you explain the difference? What's the difference between it? Ask it in that way, and absolutely, if I'll explain it to you very clearly. Like yesterday, one of the sisters asked a question like that. It was perfect. Or if I don't know, then I can work on it. I'll research it. And I'll either find the answer myself, or I have people I can ask my own teachers. I can turn to them as well. But to come and give me advice and say, you should have said this or should not have said that. This is how you should give your speech. It's unacceptable. I don't think you would do that with your professors, with your boss, and comment. Again, you could comment on the job at hand and the actual task. If there are issues there that need to be fixed, that's one thing. But to come and advise the person who's your superior, at least in that hierarchy, and tell him this is how you should do your job, there's no room for that. Right? So stop doing that. Right? Stop doing that, and don't have this attitude that you somehow can on a survey say how acceptable or unacceptable, or how much you like the scholar and the speaker, or how much you don't like the scholar and the speaker. Right? That kind of polling has no place here. My job is not to please you. Right? My job is to teach you. If there's something that I think you need to know, either specifically your community or in general Muslims need to know something, my job is to stand up and do my best to try to teach you that particular thing in the best way I can, and this is the only opportunity I have for doing this. Right? There's no room for saying this is a majlis of Imam Hussein. There's no room for, we shouldn't be talking about other Islamic things, as though other Islamic things are somehow off limits because this is Imam Hussein's majlis, somehow we have to just talk about his stories. Absolutely not. One of the philosophies of the majalis, and one of the reasons why this institution is there, like I mentioned the first day, is that this is a classroom. It's an ongoing, perpetual classroom that we have for the whole community. Adults don't attend Sunday school, right? We don't have any sort of continuing education. We have this though. And so all the aspects, any aspect of Islam is fair game for a majlis. Yes, we have some specific mention of Imam Hussein's story and all of that. That's in its own place. That's also an integral part of the majlis, but it doesn't have to be the entire purpose of the majlis. But back to the point, because my purpose is, my goal and my role is not to please you, to say things that you already know to make you feel very happy. Or to make you feel like, okay, good, you're good, whatever you knew is good, and you have nothing else to learn. So what I say is sometimes challenging, right? Don't be alarmed. Take the challenge. Rise to the challenge. And if it challenges something that you thought you knew, or you didn't know, so be it. Engage with me. Right? Try to understand what I'm saying. If it doesn't make sense, I'll clarify it. Ask me and I'll clarify it. And we can engage like that. And the whole purpose is guidance and education. Okay? So please don't even if the administration has these kinds of surveys and polls and stuff where you say, do you like the speaker or do not like the speaker, take that out. That's a useless question. The question that you should ask is, did we benefit from these speeches? Did I learn something? Is our community now better because of what he taught us or not? That's the only relevant question I can think of for evaluating the speakers who come here, especially if they're scholars. If they're not scholars, then maybe you have room for other things. But if they're scholars, properly trained, Hawza scholars, then they are warathatul anbiya, and you should treat them like that. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I began this discussion yesterday to kind of change modes. About paradigms. I introduced one paradigm and offered some criticism of the paradigm and an alternative paradigm that Islam puts forward for that particular issue. I want to continue with that same process with a different paradigm today. Today the paradigm I want to look at is one, again, that I think is extremely important. And that is the idea that religion is subjective. Right? That religion is subjective. That whether or not, whether a particular religion is true or false, right or wrong, legitimate or illegitimate, is a matter of opinion. Right? That's a paradigm that our culture has assimilated, And that forms the backbone and kind of the background for a lot of our interactions and a lot of what we hear and a lot of what, our discussions and all this stuff with regard to religion. It's based on this premise that religion is fundamentally subjective. Right, let me explain a little bit about this term, subjective and objective. So a subjective thing is something that is subject to opinion or perspective. Right? So you look at a particular painting and I say it's beautiful, and you say no, you don't actually like it. You think it's ugly. It's a matter of opinion. There's no absolute standard to say it's on a particular scale. It scores this, therefore it's beautiful, or therefore it's ugly. Right? It's just a matter of perspective. I say I like a particular kind of cuisine, and you say you don't like it. It's a matter of perspective and opinion. We can have our own opinions. There's no right or wrong answer to either of our opinions. That's something subjective. Something objective, on the other hand, is not subject to opinion. You can in an unbiased way, you can say it is either true or false, and there's a way to verify that. There's a way to establish that. And once the fact is established, once all the data is in, then that's it. There's no room for saying, in my opinion, it's otherwise. So you can say, for instance, think about just different facts that we have. The temperature. The temperature is 57 degrees outside. Right? So it's a fact. Objectively, you can say that. We can measure it. We can corroborate. We can check different scales, and there's no room for opinion in something like that. So to say that religion is subjective is to say that it's subject to opinion. If I happen to believe in Islam and I think that Islam is true, and someone else happens to believe that Christianity is true, who's to say I'm right or he's right? For me, Islam is right. For him, Christianity is right. Right? That's what the paradigm says. It's subjective. There's no absolute standard. There's no way to really know who's telling the truth and who's not. Who's on the right path? Who's not on the right path? It's a matter of perspective and opinion. We can split up this idea. So I mentioned that religion is subjective. I want to focus on religion in general for theists. But we can also ask the same, think about the same thing with regards to the question of God himself, God's existence. Right? So atheists now are more and more vocally of the opinion that God's existence itself is also subjective. If you say God exists, there is no evidence to show that. There's no empirical evidence to show that. And if that is not empirical evidence to show it, then why? There's no sense in believing it. If you do happen to believe in it, it's because psychologically you need to think that. You need to believe that because that gives you hope. It comforts you, whatever. That's your own issue, but it has no bearing on reality. So they even say that belief in God is subjective. Now that's a separate issue. I don't want to focus on that because it's not a paradigm yet. It hasn't reached the level of a paradigm where society it kind of functions on that assumption that there is no God. On the contrary, society functions on the assumption that there is a God. The vast majority of people still in our society here in America still believe that there is a God. Right? Hopefully that won't change in our lifetime, but it could. Yeah, unfortunately it could. Right? The statistics. There's one survey I saw that kind of identified different religions. And they said 15% of Americans now identify with no religion. And many of that 15% are atheists. Right? So they're on the rise. And unfortunately, in influential positions, especially in university, those of you who are students, more and more you'll encounter professors, especially in the sciences, who are atheists, and sometimes very belligerently so. Right? You're probably familiar with Bill Maher, for instance, and Richard Dawkins. And these kinds of people who are really belligerent, almost they're fanatical, almost religiously fanatical atheists. It's an oxymoron, but that's really what they are. Right? Richard Dawkins' latest book, the God Delusion. He actually, in the preface, he says that my purpose in writing this book is I'm hoping that by the time you finish this book, you'll be an atheist. So he's proselytizing atheism. He's become the imam of the atheists. Really, it's gotten that bad. So unfortunately, we have this kind of a trend, and we need to be aware of that. But that's a separate issue because it hasn't reached the level of a paradigm. I'm going to sideline that topic some. Just let me say this as well. Well, with regard to atheism, sometimes we are kind of sometimes we are a little bit foolish with ourselves, or maybe we overestimate ourselves, and we expose ourselves to doubts, like the doubts of atheism. the arguments of atheists, thinking that, well, we'll be able to figure it out. That's not a smart thing to do. Right? So don't, for instance, if you don't already have doubts about your core fundamental beliefs, don't go looking for trouble by saying, oh, let me go into research and see what so and so says about why he says there's no God. Let me see what he says, and hopefully I'll have an answer for it. Because what if you don't have an answer for it? Or if you're not equipped for it, if you're not prepared, if you don't know how to swim, and you jump into the water, it's foolish. Right? If you're not immunized against a disease and you expose yourself to disease, it's foolish. So the same thing goes with this. If you're not immunized to the disease of atheism, and you don't have the background, or you don't have access to a scholar who can help you and be your guide through those ideas, don't voluntarily expose yourself to things that haven't already come to find you. Okay? So let's sideline atheism for the present. But what I do want to focus on is that initial premise, that initial paradigm that religion is subjective. So now let's assume that people believe in God. Right? We're dealing with believers, theists, people who do believe in God, at whatever level. Sometimes it might be just their own kind of version of God without any sort of religious affiliation, or they might be subscribing to a particular religious tradition, but they believe in God at least. Now, where does this paradigm come from? Right? What's the origin of this paradigm? Why do people come to the point where they feel like religion is subjective and they've lost the attitude that my religion is true and all other religions are false? Right? It seems like relatively few and fewer people are willing to make that kind of a statement about their own faith, their own religion. I don't have statistics to back that up. I think that's generally the trend. That more and more people are more of the opinion that who knows? I'm a devout Christian, but who knows if this is actually right? The Muslims also think they're devout Muslims. They also think they're right. Maybe they're right, and we're almost agnostic believers, as opposed to agnostics who are heading towards atheism. We become agnostic believers. Who knows if it's really right? But I'm going to make this assumption. Just go with it because that's what I was born into, and that's what's comfortable for me. So I'll go with it. All right, so what has led to this kind of an attitude towards religion? I think there are two vital ingredients that lead to this. One is diversity of religion. Right? If you live in a society where everyone believes the same thing, or even a community, just a small community where everyone believes the same thing, then there's no serious challenge to your faith, and everyone corroborates what you believe, and there's no serious challenge. And so you can be kind of absolutist and say this is the right way, this is the truth, and kind of have that attitude. But as soon as you get into a society like we have in America, where you are constantly interacting with other faiths, that poses some challenges. Especially, the second ingredient is a lack of thoughtful religious guidance. Right? So if you have a diverse society where other people are following all sorts of religions, but you don't have someone to kind of guide you through this, and first of all, confirm for you and help you to confirm that your religious beliefs are correct and others are incorrect, and then what to do about it, then you're going to end up with this situation where asserting the truth of your own belief means telling other people they're wrong, and that becomes very uncomfortable. Right? As long as religion is about kind of just you and God, and it's a very private thing, which again many people have that tendency to make it consider it really kind of a private thing. Right? If religion is just about praying in the quiet in a corner somewhere, and that's religion, and that's the extent of your religion, then that doesn't step on anyone's toes. That's very comfortable. I say my prayers in a mosque, he says his prayers in a synagogue, no big deal. I bow down to one God, he bows down to idols, no big deal. But as soon as religion becomes something more than that, where religion is now also drawing certain limits on life and saying there are certain things that are unlawful, that are immoral, that are wrong, that belief in any other God besides the one God is unacceptable. Right? If you're in that society, a diverse society where people believe different things, then you're going to end up stepping on people's toes. If you profess those beliefs, then necessarily you're going to start offending people because they're going to say, wait, who are you to say that your religion is right? So if you don't have that guidance, thoughtful religious guidance to help you to figure out what to do about this, then you're going to, well, we can take one of two stances. One is that you do figure out some way of dealing with it. Another way is just to cop out and say, well, I'm going to back off. I'm not going to make such claims that start stepping on people's toes because that's not very comfortable. I'm going to kind of shrink my religion and bring it into a comfortable level where religion only deals with those things that are kind of those private things, just me and God, and doesn't really affect anything else of my life. I can just kind of put it into a little corner, brush it under the rug, and every once in a while when I need it, I'll pull it out, say my prayers, and that's it. I'll hide it away again. I can be a normal person like everyone else and not step on anyone's toes. That attitude towards religion is what's led to this idea that religion is basically subjective. It's all subject to opinion. Because it's too scary to say otherwise. To make that claim that it is an objective truth, what I believe is right, and I have reasons for it, and anything else is wrong, that's hard to say. It takes knowledge, it takes thinking, and then it takes the courage to be able to say that something else is wrong, and then to deal with the consequences of calling something else wrong. So all of those things become very difficult, and one of the ways people deal with that is by considering religion to be something subjective. Recite Salawat, please. Okay, so this paradigm that says that religion is subjective, why is it harmful? Yesterday, that was also one of the important parts of our discussion. First of all, let's identify the paradigm. Then let's identify what's so wrong about such a paradigm, what are the consequences, and then we can come up with a solution, an Islamic paradigm. This paradigm is harmful, it's dangerous, because it reduces religion, which is speaking about truth, to opinion. It makes it something so frivolous. It makes it almost, at best, something like just something to satisfy some of our urges. Right? Some people, to relax, they do yoga. Some people exercise. Some people have religion. They pray. It just becomes one of those things that people do to unwind. Some people listen to music. Some people do drugs. And people have all sorts of ways of dealing with problems in the world. Some people choose religion. They think, let's imagine a system of justice, because I can't get justice here in this world. Let's imagine there's a day of judgment, that there's some all-powerful God who will take revenge on people, and that satisfies them, so they can be at peace with people in the world, and just kind of not be too concerned with the dhulm that happens here, and say, well, God will take care of it later. Right? It becomes something like that, where it's just another thing that people do, rather than what it really is, which is a deen, a way of life that deals with every single aspect of your life, of speaking about the truth and telling you exactly what you need to do, how you need to live your life in order to satisfy a very real God. Right, so that's why it's so dangerous to have such a paradigm. What does Islam do? What is Islam's paradigm about religion? Certainly it doesn't say it's subjective, it's definitely objective. Like I mentioned before, one of the reasons why the paradigm comes about in the first place is we have diversity, right? But we don't have the guidance. Well, Islam is also dealing with the same diversity. It's helping us to deal with the same diversity that we have, but now we have the guidance to tell us, first of all, to tell us and let us know that what we believe is true, and what the reasons are for that, and that what other people believe, for instance, is false, and that there are reasons for that as well. And then one step further, which I'll get to at the end, is it also teaches us what to do about it. Because one thing just to say this is right and that everything else is wrong, but then practically how are we supposed to deal with the people who are following the wrong? What are our duties towards them? How do we interact with them? That's also very important, and Islam gives us all of it. So one of the things that we have, and this is something that thankfully Allah has created us with, without which we wouldn't be human, is our intellect. What people sometimes do, though, when they face this diversity of religions around them, they come to the conclusion that since somebody else has a different opinion than I do, we have to just throw our hands up and say there's no way to decide. That whole, what I call kind of agnostic belief. We don't do that in the rest of our life. In the rest of the spheres of our lives, we don't interact with people like that. And take an issue, a scientific issue. Say, for instance, that I do research that, and if I find that cigarettes, for instance, are carcinogenic and they lead to cancer. And I have evidence to say that, but then somebody else has the opinion that no, there's no clear linkage and it's not necessarily a cause. Or maybe a more real example is global warming. Right. So we have people who have scientific data to say that there is such a thing as global warming. We do have data to corroborate this kind of a trend in our climate patterns worldwide, and there's a particular cause that we can also trace the whole thing back to, and there's a causal relationship and there's a trend that we can. But there are people who oppose that. Right? The way we deal with that, we don't say, oh well, if you oppose that and say that no, global warming is not established, and the data doesn't kind of conclusively say that there is some sort of a trend. Well, let's just throw our hands up and say, well, there's no way to really decide. It's my opinion, that's your opinion, so be it. We don't do that. We argue the point, and we say, look, I have all this data on my side that corroborates my viewpoint, and then you come forth and you say, well, you have data that goes the opposite, and then we compare the data and we see what are the sources of the data, how they've been calculated, which one has more validity, which one has, what are the margins of error and all these different things, and statistically we'll figure out a way to come to a conclusion that my data is stronger than your data, therefore I'm right and you're wrong. Right? That's the rigor with which we deal with other issues. But why, when it comes to religion, do we have this attitude that even though I'm pretty sure my religion's right, everything makes sense to me, but you say your religion's right, and all of a sudden I get very unsure. And I say, well, we can't know. There's no way to decide, and so let's just leave it at that. And you follow whatever you're following. I'll follow whatever I'm following. That's it. We have a way to engage with the same rigor. We don't have empirical data necessarily the way we had for the example of global warming, but we have our intellect, and our intellect is a very powerful tool with which we can know truth. So if I believe that my religion is true, I should be able to use my intellect to be able to make sure that that's the case. And if I believe your religion is false, then again, my intellect is the tool that's going to guide me to the facts and show me why your religion has to be false, and why the two are not compatible, like that. So we have a sufficient tool in our intellect, but sometimes we suspend that and we're scared of the consequences, and so we come up with that same old paradigm that religion is subjective. So Islam says, no, use your intellect. Right? Use your intellect to find the truth. So one of the things we can do, let's assume kind of this paradigm where I'm a Muslim, I know that what I believe is true. That itself takes a lot of effort. Right? A lot of us are born into it. Right? Some of us are not. Some of us are converts, right? Myself included. Right? Not into Islam, but from another sect to this sect. Right? So some of us have had to work a little bit harder to get to where we are now. But many of you were probably born into 12-er Shi'ism, and that's a blessing, but you need to also reconfirm your beliefs using your intellect, and not simply take it at face value. Otherwise, you're not in a much better situation than followers of other religions who accept their religions unthinkingly. Right? You happen to have found the right religion, which is good, but that faith is going to be easily shaken if you're ever put in the right situation or the wrong situation. So you want to make sure that you use your intellect to re-establish and reconfirm the beliefs that you have, so that you're sure, and you know that you're sure that this religion is true. So let's assume that that's the case, that we know now that our religion is true, but we're still faced with this diversity of other people who also are just as convinced that their religion is true. Our intellect comes in to be the judge. So the three ways to use our intellect to think about the truth or the falsehood of these other religions. One, and then it's not limited to these three, but these are, I think, three very good ways, and conclusive ways to make this judgment. One is to see whether any of the teachings of that religion are contrary to the intellect. If it's making claims that are irrational. My intellect has the ability to evaluate things. And if it sees something that is illogical, irrational, then red lights go off and they say that that's false. My intellect then concludes that that particular thing is false. And that directly translates into my knowledge and my certainty that it's false. And I have proof. I have proof, at least for myself, that this thing is false because, and I have a reason too, because this thing was irrational. Right? That's theoretical. Let's think of some examples. So one is, for instance, think of a religion that, on the one hand, claims that, think of like these pagan religions, the old mythologies, the Greek and Roman mythology, where they have this idea that the gods created everything. But at the same time, they make up these stories about the gods themselves, how they were born and they have relationships and these sorts of things. And they were also, there's a time when the gods themselves were born to their fathers. Right? It's an irrational belief. If I am dependent on my cause, and that cause in turn is dependent on another cause, and that cause in turn is dependent on another cause, and that keeps on going infinitely, that I can never come into existence. It's like, if you haven't thought about this before, it's kind of mind-boggling at first, but it's simple. If you think about dominoes, right? Set up dominoes. You push one, and the one pushes the other, and the whole thing goes down. Now, what if you set up a whole series of dominoes, right? If nobody ever comes and pushes the first domino, then is that chain of dominoes ever going to fall? It doesn't have to be somebody, any force. If no force comes to push the first domino, then none of these dominoes is going to fall. That last domino is me. Right? When that domino falls, that's my existence. That's when I'm born and I live, and then when the domino stops, I die. Right? That last domino is me. The one before it's my parents, the one before it's their parents, and so forth, all the way back. Right? If we have an infinite chain of dominoes, and there's no one to come and push the first domino, then there's no way I can explain my own existence. So now if they come up with a system that says that the God who created me in turn needs a creator, and apparently that God's also going to need a creator, and all the way back, then it's this infinite chain of dominoes, and there's no way that system, that worldview, can explain the existence of everything that I know, including my own existence, in which I'm certain. Right, that's a little bit heavy example, but it's an irrational, the claim that they're making, and that kind of fundamental belief of that kind of a religion is an irrational claim, and because it's irrational, my intellect confidently says it's absolutely false, and it can't be. That can't be the way things are, that you have gods who create gods. Think maybe the Trinity is a better example. So think of the Trinity. How many Christians, Trinitarian Christians, believe that God is one, but they also believe that God is three. And for some reason, they don't see the contradiction in the two, but there's clearly a contradiction. All the different formulations they have for it. I've recently been engaged with a Christian theologian, maybe a self-taught theologian of sorts, and we've been having kind of discussions back and forth for a couple of weeks now. And this is one of the issues that we brought up, that I brought up as a contradiction in his faith. We kind of went back and forth, and we said, we can agree that if a religion or a scripture contains a contradiction which can't be resolved, then that scripture can't be from God, as it's a false scripture. All right, so we came to that agreement, and then we said, okay, let's each take a turn. Right, I'll point out something in your beliefs or your system that's irrational, illogical, and then you do the same to mine, and then we'll discuss each of those topics and see if we can come to some conclusion, and come to a conclusion that yes, that is a contradiction, or no, you have some logical solution that resolves the issue. The best that he was able to come up with after many discussions for the Trinity was to say that God is one being with three personalities. And no matter how he phrased it, and whatever, he wasn't able to really kind of break out of that. But clearly, to say that there's one indivisible being, but he has three divisible personalities, there's clearly a separation between the two. And he even went to the point where he said God is the creator, and the Son is created, but there's still one being. It's clearly a contradiction. He's by saying one's a creator and one's the created, They're clearly two separate beings. So then he's saying they're unified as well. Right? So if that's the kind of Trinity, and I don't know any better kind of version of the Trinity. Every version that they're able to come up with, it all devolves to the same internal, irrational kind of conclusion that 1 has to somehow equal 3. Right? So any belief system that has that as its foundation is clearly false because it's irrational, it's illogical. My mind rejects it and it says confidently that that is false. So that's one standard. If something is irrational, then I can reject it. One more example. This is also from the Quran. So there's a phrase in the Quran where it attributes to the Jews. It says the Jews said "Yadullahi maghlula," right? That God's hands are tied. Right. So any belief system, if this is what Jews believe, or there's certain, I'm sure there's sects of Jews at least that have this sort of belief. Maybe all of them do. To say that on one hand God is omnipotent, He's the all-powerful Creator, but at the same time, or on the other hand, to say, but His hands are tied. He made us the chosen people, and now He can't repeal that. Too bad. It doesn't matter if we haven't held up our end of the covenant. That's not our problem. He made the promise. He gave us the promised land. We're the chosen people, and now God's hands are tied. And غُلَّتْ أَيْدِيهِمْ. Immediately Allah says, may their hands be tied. Right, but that the contradiction is there. That on one hand they're saying He's omnipotent, but then they're tying His hands at one point saying, no, He doesn't have the power to repeal this favor that he gave to us, and we're His favored people until the end. Okay. So that's one way of judging religions with our intellect and saying, if a religion contains anything that's irrational, then I can confidently reject it as false because of that irrational point, which is a foundation of that religion. A second way is to look for internal inconsistencies. Right? The Quran kind of gives us a hint in this direction. It says, لو كان من عند غير الله لوجدوا فيه اختلافا كثيرا. That if this Quran, or any book, if a book were to be from other than God, then you would find all sorts of inconsistencies in it. Internal contradictions. It wouldn't be a coherent book because if it's up to you and me to write something, we'll think of something one day and then a couple months down the road we'll write something else and we won't realize there's actually a contradiction between what I said then and what I said now. Right? Because of our imperfections, we can't keep track of all of the different ramifications of everything we say. Allah is perfect, so when He says something, it's always internally cohesive and coherent. Everything's perfect. So if it's from other than Allah, you'll find all sorts of errors. But if it's from Allah, then it'll be perfect. Right. So if you find a scripture that has internal inconsistencies, then that's also a sign that this is not from God. This is a false religion, or at least that part of that book is false. This is, I think, a more difficult way of going about it. If you're trying to disprove a religion, or if you're trying to confirm for yourself that a religion is false, unless someone else has found the examples for you, even then, don't jump to the conclusion. This is a cautionary note. Sometimes we make the mistake of finding bits of scripture, for instance, from the Bible. And we say, see, in Matthew it says this, in Luke it says this, there's a clear contradiction, the Bible's false. We shouldn't be so quick to judge. Right? It could be, but to be fair, at least if you're trying to be fair and level-headed, you should make sure that whatever interpretation you're attaching to those particular phrases of the Bible or whatever other text you're looking at, that's what they themselves believe. Because if they flip that around and do the same thing to the Quran, they'll also find things like that. Right? Certainly, you have found, if you read the Quran carefully, you'll find instances where apparently there's a contradiction between this verse and that verse. Right? That shouldn't come as a surprise. It's challenge sometimes. When you're trying to teach something in a very subtle way, one of the ways to do it is to kind of challenge the speaker, the audience, to give them something that they think, okay, it's a general statement, and then to give them something else, and it's more specific, and that kind of jars their thinking, and they have to think a little bit, and then they realize, oh, here's the resolution of these two things. So, for instance, just one example, in some verses it speaks about, for instance, it speaks about free will. Allah says that we have guided them to the path, and it's up to them to choose to either follow it or not. إِنَّا هَدَيْنَاهُ السَّبِيلَ إِمَّا شَاكِرًا وَإِمَّا كَفُورًا. Right, so definitely we have free will. We can either choose to follow the guidance of Allah or reject the guidance. We have that power. On the other hand, it says, وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. You can't will anything unless Allah wills it. That seems to say, well, I don't have the power to make my own choice. Right? It seems like it's saying, if you want to will something, if you want to choose to follow, it has to be through Allah's will. It's not you who's willing, but Allah who's willing. That's what it seems like it's saying, but that's not the case, clearly. Right? So we have to go back, when you see that apparent contradiction between free will on one side and determinism on the other, then to be fair, we should go back to their interpretations of that, go back to our scholars and see how do they resolve this apparent contradiction. Do they have a reasonable reconciliation of these two verses or not? Is there no reconciliation? So the reconciliation that we do have is that they're both true. The one that's saying free will, absolutely, we do have free will. The one that seems to be saying that we don't have free will, what it's really saying is that the fact that we have free will is by the will of God. For me to be able to have the freedom to choose to either follow guidance or reject guidance, God had to give me that choice to be able to make that choice. Right? So the fact that I have the will to choose is by the will of God. So if I choose guidance or I choose misguidance, the fact that I have that choice, that's by the will of God. Not that He makes me choose one or makes me choose the other. No, He makes me have a choice. We're forced to have free will. Yeah, we're compelled to have free will. We have no choice but we have to make a choice to either accept or reject. That's the one kind of the paradox of free will, that we have no choice but to have free will. Right? So there's a resolution between those two verses, and then it's up to the person who's examining the contradiction to say, yes, I'm satisfied with that explanation. That makes total sense, and I can see how this verse could be construed in two different ways, and the way you're saying is a legitimate explanation for this, and it's all resolved. Or, no, you're really stretching it. Yeah, there's no way that verse says that. I see the words in front of me, and there's no way that verse is saying that. And the person has to make his own judgment. He has his own intellect. He sees the contradiction. He hears the explanation, and he says, "No, that's a stretch. You're toying with me. You're not telling me the truth." And so he'll reject it and say, "There is a contradiction in the Quran, and I reject the Quran altogether." And we have to have this kind of brutal honesty and brutal kind of willingness to make these judgments when we're dealing with truth and falsehood, especially if you're dealing with other people of other faiths, right? You have to show that we're willing to challenge ourselves, and we're willing to say, to the extent, if you can confirm for me that the Quran has contradictions, I'm willing to reject it. Right? We have to have that sort of confidence, and we have the power to do that. Fortunately, because we happen to have the right book, and we happen to have the right guidance for the Ahlul Bayt, right? We have the strength, if not you in yourself, at least make sure that you tie into a scholar, tie into someone who can give you that strength to be able to have that sort of confidence and be able to make that sort of a challenge for yourself to say that even I'm a follower of truth, wherever truth lies. And if someone can prove to me that another religion is correct and this is false, I'm willing to do that because I'm a follower of truth. And it'll never happen, of course, because we have the truth in Islam. Right, so internal contradictions are also one of those things. But my point was we should have that same sense of fairness with other people as well. We shouldn't quickly make that judgment for them, but then when it comes to our book and they find a contradiction in our book, we say, oh, well, we have an explanation for it. Well, let's see what the explanation they have as well, and make sure that explanation is truly irrational, is truly stretching it before we make the judgment that is a contradiction and we're going to reject your book. Right, so I think that's a much more difficult way of doing it. The first one, the irrational, things that are irrational, that's an easy kind of judgment. The third way to do it is to see whether the claims of religions are consistent with our experience with the world around us. Right? So we know the world around us. We empirically, through our senses and all this stuff, we know the world around us to a great extent. If a religion comes along and makes claims that contradict what I have experienced from the world, then that's also clearly false. The source of and the one who created the world is the one who's supposed to have created this book. There shouldn't be any sort of inconsistencies between the two. So, for instance, one example also linked to the Quran is if a religion says that this world is a product of multiple gods. Right? Think of the mythologies of these old polytheistic pagan religions, Hinduism and Greek mythology, and the Greeks and the Romans and these kinds of people. Right? They had this idea that there are multiple creators. There's the god of the ocean and the god of the crops and god of war and all these different things. So every sphere of life and every part of creation has a different god controlling it. The Quran says, لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. It says that if the creator of the heavens and the earth, if in the heavens and the earth there were gods other than Allah, like multiple gods, then you'd have total chaos. You wouldn't have this system that we have now. Right? Our senses, we look out at the system and we study it, and with as much depth as we can study the cosmos, we see that there are, for instance, consistent laws that govern throughout. Right? So the same laws of the same gravitational constant that's true here, it holds true throughout the cosmos, the material cosmos that we have. The same elements that make up our small world here also make up the rest of the cosmos. And so we see that everything in our experience is consistent. The way the world around us works, no matter how far we go, no matter where we look, it's all consistent. It's all controlled. It all has to be controlled by a single mind. If it were controlled by multiple minds, the god of the ocean would say, I want a tidal wave to come on shore. The god of the wind would say, no, these are my favorite people. I'm going to send the wind to fight against the tidal wave and blow it back. And the god of the rain would say, I don't feel I want to punish these people, and I'm not going to make it rain. And the god of agriculture would say, no, I need your rain, and make it rain. And there'll be a conflict between all these different minds, and you'd have total chaos, like they did. Unfortunately, we have to read this Greek and Roman mythology in school. For me, it was 8th grade, where we had to read all of this stuff. And that's exactly what their mythology was. The stories of that. Maybe some of you read Hindu mythology and stuff back in India, and you might have had the same experience. That the way they portrayed these gods of theirs was just like this. It was a soap opera. It was ridiculous. All sorts of relationships, and going out and being having infidelity, and all these different sorts of things, and being mischievous with one another. One takes revenge on the other and tries to undermine him, and he undermines her. And this is the whole story of their gods. Right? So if that's the way the gods are, if there are that many gods and they have that kind of relationship, then this isn't the kind of world that they would create. So the kind of world that we have, which is consistent and beautiful and all coherent, could not be the product of multiple gods. Therefore, any religion that's polytheistic and says that the world is a product of multiple gods, it's wrong because it doesn't fit with what I know to be true of the world. See how that works? So again, I'm using my intellect, but I'm comparing the religion and its claims to the world around me. Right? So those are 3 powerful tools that we have then to be able to actually make a judgment with confidence, with work too. It definitely takes work to do all of this. Right? We have to think about these things and have to research them to make sure that the data is correct before we draw conclusions. But we can look for irrational elements of religions, internal inconsistencies in religions, or inconsistencies between the religion and the world around us. And there are probably other things you can think of as well, other kinds of red lines, that if a religion crosses these red lines and my intellect decides that, then it's also false. But these are, I think, 3 good solid ones that we can use very practically. Recite with salawat, please. The other important question that I alluded to earlier is that, okay, now I have used my intellect to determine and confirm for myself that Islam is true, and specifically that Islam of the Ahlul Bayt is true. I've also used my intellect to determine that other religions are false, because I can go through each and every religion. Let's start with the big contenders, the Christianity and as Trinity, for instance. That's a clear red line that says that there's no way this can be true. Or think of the whole conception of how God's justice is supposed to work. It's supposed to work according to their belief. That somehow we can sin and he punishes himself and punishes his son, and somehow that's supposed to satisfy his justice and he doesn't have to punish me anymore. Like those kinds of concepts that are fundamental to Christianity are either irrational or there are internal inconsistencies within the religion itself. And similarly with Judaism and Hinduism, so start with the major contenders. If those major contenders are out, then it's much easier. The polytheistic religions are very easy to debunk based on this last point that I said from that verse in Surah Al-Anbiya, لَوْ كَانَ فِيهِمَا آلِهَةٌ إِلَّا اللَّهُ لَفَسَدَتَا. But now the problem is, what do I do now that I know that I'm right and I have reasons for it? It's not a dogmatic thing. I just know I'm right. I'm not gonna, without any reason. No, I have reasons, and I know I'm right because of these reasons that are irrefutable. And I know that these other religions are wrong also because of these reasons. not simply because I don't like them or I'm not comfortable with them, but I have reasons for why each of these religions is false. Now what do? I still have to deal with them. I still have to deal with the followers of those religions. They're my neighbors, they're my co-workers, my classmates. So Islam also guides us here to tell us how we should interact with them. This is quite complex. I'll just kind of illustrate some of these points because this is something very practical for us as well. Let me also relate it back to the main idea, because the idea was that because people are thrown into this diversity and they don't know how to deal with it, that's why they end up with this idea that religion is subjective. Right? Remember, that was the main paradigm that we're trying to debunk. Now, Islam not only gives us a way to tell us that no, there are objective standards I can use to establish the truth of Islam and the falsehood of other religions, but it's also going to help us deal with the consequences of that conclusion, which is, okay, how do I deal with people? Right? So that's kind of the whole structure of what I'm trying to get across to. So how do we deal with people? Again, it's complicated, but some of the main themes are, for instance, one thing is that we have, as people who know the truth and have the truth, we have an obligation to other people to guide them. Okay? Not to kill them, the way, for instance, Wahhabis their conclusion to this problem is that if you don't follow my religion, then off with your head, right? Certainly, that's not what Islam teaches us, and certainly not the Islam of the Ahlul Bayt. If you don't believe what I believe, and I know that what I know is true, and I know that you're making a mistake and you're following a false thing, I have a duty towards you to do whatever I can to try to find a way to guide you in the best possible way. It shouldn't be in ways like, for instance, Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons who do also have that, they feel that same obligation to reach out and try to guide people, but sometimes they do it in a way, at least in America, they do it in a way that usually pushes people away more than it draws people in. So we do have that duty, but it should be done in very tactful, beautiful ways. That was actually, I don't know if you remember, but that was the topic of my last Muharram that I had with you, enjoining good and forbidding evil, Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. 6-7 years ago, we talked the whole 10 days about that concept. So that feeds into this issue, how to enjoin good and forbid evil, both amongst the Muslims, but also irshad al-jahl, guiding people who are misguided to the truth. Then we also have, so we have that one duty towards them to guide them. We also have a duty towards ourselves and the people we're responsible for, our children, for instance, to protect ourselves and protect them. That's also something we should keep in mind, right? So again, like that analogy of drowning. If someone's drowning, for me to jump in without knowing how to swim is foolhardy. For me to go into the hospital to cure sick people when I myself am not immunized, I don't have the right equipment to protect myself, it's foolhardy. Right? So the same thing goes with religion. If there are people who have false beliefs, and they're following a false religion, and by interacting with them or by broaching certain subjects with them, I'm actually putting myself at more risk, or I'm putting myself at risk, period, then that's not worth it. I need to make sure I'm solid in my beliefs, and that they're not going to come up with some objection to Islam that's going to shake me if I'm not prepared for it. Unless I have the proper backing. If I have a scholar to ask, if I have enough learning, if I have the right support structure, that's fine. But without that, it's foolhardy. So those are two of the main considerations that we have to have with people. One is this responsibility to guide them in a tactful, effective way. That's the bottom line. And on the other hand, I have to protect myself to make sure that I am not putting myself at danger as I'm trying to guide them. I end up actually losing my own faith, or putting my children or my people who are dependent on me at risk because I'm exposing them to ideas that they're not prepared to handle. And I don't have the skill to be able to help them to sort through all those issues. Okay, recite salawat. Questions? Let's take a couple of minutes for questions. Again, specific questions to the talk, any clarification or things that deal with the talk itself are fair game.
The one equals three paradigm that Christians have, how do you deal with when they say, they give you the water example, water, ice, and steam? And they say it's all water, but it's ice and steam, but it's water.
Sheikh, Can you
so he was asking about the Trinity example and how like I guess he's heard a comeback on behalf or an explanation on behalf of Christians that it's like water, gas, and steam, right? Three forms of the same substance. Saying that all three of those things are actually one substance, it's actually a fallacy. Because what we're dealing with the Trinity that they believe in is not three classes of things which are basically a division of one larger category. What we're dealing with is one particular glass of water, right? And saying this glass of water, can it be both, like this exact same volume, the exact same molecules of water that are in this glass, can they at the same time be water, gas, and ice? Water vapor, liquid, and ice. Right? And that's impossible. These particular molecules can't at the same time have all three of those qualities and be all three of those things. You could split it up into three and have part of it be one, part of it the other, but you can't at the same time have all three. Yeah, so and that's the kind of explanation that this gentleman also offered me. He said it's God's one, but he has three personalities. I asked him, what do these personalities represent? Because when we talk about human beings, I have me, my physical body, and I have my soul. Those are two things that definitely exist. My personality is not something separate from that. My personality, we use that word to describe how I, as a person, my body and soul, how it comes across to you, how it interacts with you. That's my personality. But it's not a separate entity. So when you're saying God, like this one God has three personalities, are you saying there are three entities there, each one has a particular personality? Or no, there's just one being and three personalities, and then where do the three personalities come from? Because one singular being, one singular indivisible being cannot have three separate personalities that have separate wills and separate functions and these sorts of things. That's the contradiction. And his only comeback was to just keep on playing with the words and saying, oh no, I don't see the contradiction. There's no contradiction. And it's just one being and three personalities. He just kept on repeating the same thing, but there was really no. I think any rational person would hear that and hear his explanation or my explanation and say, clearly this is an inconsistency. Clearly it can't work. But he wasn't able to see it.
Another question on this?
Yeah, question on the sister's end? Yeah, there's one. If you want, go ahead and say, I'll repeat it.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I was wondering, you had mentioned that you were having a conversation with a Christian person, and you both were pointing out each other's contradictory points in religions. So what did he have contradictory point towards Islam?
I'll tell you tomorrow. Tomorrow we have our next discussion. We took a big break because I had gone for Hajj, and tomorrow's our next meeting. So I'll let you know tomorrow.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, she was asking what was his objection to Islam. Like, we took turns finding contradictions in each other's religion. So tomorrow is his turn to find something in Islam.
Yesterday you discussed the relationships between different genders and touching the opposite gender, non-mahram, is haram. In this society, there are situations where shaking hands is normal. And if the opposite gender, they extend their hand to shake hand, how do you deal with that? I mean, it is so impolite if you don't shake their hand.
Yeah. So he's asking about this idea of shaking hands and how do we deal with that situation? Because often we're put in that situation where the person of the opposite sex has extended their hand and we're kind of left in an awkward situation. The first thing to know is that the rule is there, and we have to figure out a way to abide by the rule. Let's start with that. So the rule is definitely there, and it's our job to figure out how can we live our lives in a way that abides by this rule, despite the culture that we're living in. The best thing, actually, I learned this lesson for the first time from Sheikh Safdar, Ravi, right, who was here when I came last time to Austin. He was still the resident alim here. And I remember the first day I showed up here, it was very cold like today, and there was the interfaith thing. I think there was some vandalism that happened at one of the, either here or one of the local centers. I think it was actually here. Yeah. And so all the faith communities had come together to kind of show solidarity with the Muslims. And Sheikh Safdar, he said something at the end of his, he was very funny. And one of the way he kind of made people feel comfortable was by being humorous. And so at the end, he said, we're all going to mingle and meet each other. But he said, just remember that we Muslim men can't shake hands with your women, but we can do it metaphorically. And so he threw that out there, so all of a sudden people started laughing and chuckling, oh, what does that mean metaphorically? He said, like, for instance, I can shake your husband's hand, and then he can shake your hand. Like, he made kind of a joke out of it. But I learned from his interaction that that's really a good way to do it. Come up with your line. Practice your line, what you're going to say when the situation comes. Because when it comes, it's awkward, and if you're trying to think on the fly, it's really hard. But you should have your line ahead of time, what you're going to say, how you're going to deal with it. So, for instance, one thing I do is I'll put my hand on my chest. So even if they shake, I'll put my hand on my chest first, and I'll explain to them very quickly and very, very succinctly that my religion doesn't allow us to shake hands. And then continue the conversation with a big smile on my face. Continue the conversation, and usually it's just a passing moment. They say, "Oh," and it passes because you have a smile on your face. You said it clearly. You said it. Everything's nice and clear. They usually take it very well. And if we are consistent in doing that, it'll make our job progressively easier. What makes it more complicated is our wishy-washiness. Some of us are good at doing this, some of us are scared and we go ahead and shake hands, and so then they're confused. Like, which Muslim men can I shake hands with, which Muslim men can I not shake hands with, which ones can I hug, and they don't know what to do, right? Because we're not consistent. If we would just stick to our guns and say, it's Allah's law, I'm going to follow it, I'm going to do it in the best way I can, make it as beautiful as I can, but I'm going to do it. Right? وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. If you have taqwa, you follow Allah's law, then He'll find a way out for you. You're not going to lose your job, or you're not going to. Even if you do, it's for your best. وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ. If you end up losing that job interview because you didn't shake hands and you rubbed your female interviewee or your male interviewee the wrong way, so be it. If you've done your job, you did it the right way, you stuck to your guns, and they ended up not hiring you because of that, Allah will find something better for you than that job. يَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ. In ways that you didn't even realize you had other interviews lined up, He'll line them up for you and He'll find you a better job than what this is going to be. Yeah. One more, sisters. Yeah.
Can I ask a question from yesterday's lecture?
Sure.
Just quick clarification. We were talking about perfume. So are women allowed to wear as long as their intention is, one, not to arouse the opposite gender, and two, like for example, I put it on at home sometimes and then I forget and I go outside.
Yeah.
Is that a problem? Because my intention isn't to...
There are two, Stacey Stein put, or I think all the Large, but at least Stacey Stein's fatwa I've seen, he puts two conditions. One is the intention shouldn't be there, but also the expectation is not there on the side of the men either. And I take that to mean, for instance, like I think in our society, ether, like these kind of traditional scents, or maybe there's some perfumes also that are like that, more subtle things that are not geared for arousal, right? Those kinds of scents are safe, as long as your intention is good. But the perfumes, a lot of these commercially made perfumes, they're made based on pheromones and these kinds of things. Like the whole purpose, the way it's marketed, everything is all indecent, right? So that's just fine. You can use it, but with mahrams. But for non-mahrams, those kinds of scents, even if your intention is not good, intention's good, but the scent itself is designed for attraction, that's problematic. So I think that's I think one practical way to interpret that fatwa. The time is up. So let me call it right there.
Wait, I had a question about today's lecture. Is it okay?
Let me defer to the organizer. Okay.
You mentioned how if you already have faith in something, don't go messing with the stuff that's already established.
Yeah.
But what I've sometimes realized is, I believe in something maybe because I didn't examine it deeper. And so to get that rigorous faith in something, like how do you, walk that border?
That's a very good reason to examine, right? There's one time when you have organic doubts, doubts that you yourself have come up with. You yourself have been thinking about something. You're thinking about Allah's attributes, or how is it possible if Allah's all good? Where does this evil come from? And that you're thinking yourself, or you see a verse upon min sharri ma khalaq, from the evil of what He's created. What does that mean? Does Allah create evil? And all of a sudden this doubt comes to your mind because of the verse. That's an organic doubt. You yourself have come up with that doubt. That's a valid doubt. Of course it's valid because it's a real doubt, but you haven't done anything wrong. Now pursue it. Ask the question, think about it yourself. If you don't have the tools to answer that, then go out and find answers. Research tafasir of the verse. If you have access to scholars, ask them, here's the question, I've done this work, I've found these answers, but they're not satisfying. Is there a more satisfying answer for this? That should be a constant process. We shouldn't just kind of sit on our beliefs and say, well, I know God's one, I know the Prophet, I know the 12 Imams, I'm done. My beliefs are set, let's move on to something more interesting. If that's the extent of our engagement with these beliefs, then it's pretty superficial. That's fine. If you don't really honestly don't have any more doubts than that, if you don't have no other questions, you don't want to know anything more about Allah, the Prophet, or the Imams than that, so be it. But most of us are more inquisitive than that. So what I'm saying is don't go after doubts and say, well, I'm really confident in my beliefs in Allah. Let me see if there are some questions out there I hadn't thought of yet. Let me go open up a book of an atheist and see what he has to say and see if see how I fare. Don't do that. Right? If the doubts come after you're exposed to it in college, you're exposed to it in your own readings or whatever, then you have to deal with it on this, once you get it. But don't go after it. It's the same thing with bala. Right? We're not supposed to go after bala, hardship. Right? We shouldn't say, my life's too easy. I want to expose myself to some hardship, poverty or sickness, or we're not supposed to go after these kinds of things, right? When Allah deems it appropriate, He'll send me the test Himself. Then I have to deal with it. But I shouldn't go searching for those hardships and hope that I'll fare, because we don't know if we'll fare well. But with belief, it's really, really critical. If I expose myself to something and I don't have the capability of solving the problem, and I can't find the right answer, I'm lost. It'll shake my faith to the foundation. So once again, there were a couple of questions that came in the box. They're not related to the topic, so I didn't answer them yesterday. Maybe if I could ask the people who asked it, if you want to talk to me personally afterwards, or if I have more time in a subsequent night, then I'll address those questions. But right now, if you don't mind, I'll refrain from those questions, just because they're not directly related to the topic of the discussion. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. There's one hadith I wanted to share with you from Nafs al-Mahmum about Imam Hussein alayhi salam and these commemorations. This hadith, it's one that I alluded to earlier. It happens in the time of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. So this person, he's a poet by the name of Abu Harun al-Makfuf. He was a blind poet. And he himself narrates this hadith and says that I came to Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. فَقَالَ لِي أَنْشِدْنِي. And he recognized me as a poet, so he said, recite some poetry for me. فَأَنْشَدْتُهُ فَقَالَ لَا. I started, and he said, no, stop. He said, كَمَا تُنْشِدُونَ وَكَمَا تَرْفِيهِ عِنْدَ قَبْرِهِ. Right? He says, do it the way you all do it. Right? When you're by yourselves, when you go to his grave and you praise Imam Hussein, that's the way I want you to recite the poetry. Not in this very formal, dry style that you're doing for me now. So he starts his poetry and he starts reciting. He recites one couplet and he says, فَبَكَى فَلَمَّا بَكَى أَمْسَكْتُ أَنَا. The Imam breaks out crying when he recites this verse praising Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and so the poet suddenly stops. He thinks maybe he's done something wrong or he's gone too far, so he stops. فَقَالَ مُرْ. The Imam says, no, continue. فَمَرَرْتُ ثُمَّ قَالَ زِدْنِي. After I recited that poem, he said, give me more, recite some more. So again, he recites another poem. فَبَكَى وَتَهَايَجَ النِّسَاء. So the Imam cries, and the women who are all there also from the Ahlul Bayt, or for the family of the Imam, they also begin to cry. فَلَمَّا أَنْ سَكَتْنَا قَالَ لِي. When everything, kind of the atmosphere had calmed down, the women stopped crying, the Imam turns to me and says, Ya Aba Harun, man anshada fil Husseini alayhi salam. Anybody who recites a poem in praise of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Or not praise necessarily, but even in remembrance of Imam Hussein, let's say it like that. فَأَبْكَى عَشَرَةً فَلَهُ الْجَنَّةِ. And he makes 10 people cry, there's paradise for him. ثُمَّ جَعَلَ يَنْتَقِسُ وَاحِدًا وَاحِدًا. They said, even if he makes 9 people cry, he's Jannah. Even 8 people, Jannah. 7, he keeps on going down. حَتَّى بَلَغَ الْوَاحِد. Until he got to 1. He said, even if you make just 1 person cry, فَلَهُ الْجَنَّةِ. You get paradise. فقال من أنشد في الحسين عليه السلام فأبكى واحدا فله الجنة. ثم قال من ذكره فبكى فله الجنة. Even if you don't know poetry, you can't recite, or you don't even recite poetry, you just remember him and you cry, فله الجنة. You get paradise as well. So that's one of the many powerful hadith that we have, that are those institution building ahadith, where the imams are trying to make an example and set the tone for these kinds of institutions, where we have people passionately for generations writing volumes and volumes of poetry in praise of, kind of recounting the same old story, but in beautiful ways that every new way has an effect on us and brings tears to our eyes and helps us to recall that story and identify it in better and better ways. The story I want to share with you tonight is a story also, maybe one that you haven't heard. It's about one of the messengers of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So if you read the story in detail, the historical accounts tell us, you might wonder sometimes, how do the imams communicate, or how does the imam communicate with his representatives, with Muslim? How does Muslim get word back to the imam? Ubaidullah and Yazid, how do they all communicate with each other? So they're messengers. When Imam Hussein sent Muslim from Mecca to Kufa, he sent him along with 4 to 5 messengers, in addition to the 2 guides that ended up dying on the way. But Muslim and these 4 or 5 messengers all reached Kufa, and then they would be the correspondence back and forth for all the different letters that we know and that are so famous. One of those messengers was Abdullah ibn Yuqtur. So Abdullah ibn Yuqtur was born 3 days before Imam al-Hussein. His father, Yuqtur, was a servant in the Prophet's household, and his mother, Maymuna, was a servant in the house of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Because he was born around the same time as Imam al-Hussein, he was known as Lidatul Hussein. Someone who was born, Mawlud, with Imam Hussein. He was known as the almost like the brother of Imam, the twin of Imam Hussein, because he was born so close to him. They were so close to each other all the time. He is also known as Radi'ul Hussein, even though his mother Maymuna never nursed Imam Hussein, because she was in charge of his care along with her own son. Right? They were raised together. Maymuna, his mother, took care of him and Imam Hussein, and so he became known as the one who was nursed along with Imam Hussein, even though they weren't actually nursed together, but he was known as that, just to show the closeness that these 2 people had. He was one of the messengers between Imam Hussein and Muslim bin Aqil. Soon after Ubaidullah bin Ziyad took command of Kufa, a man named Malik ibn Yarbu' at-Tamimi came to Ibn Ziyad and said, "May God protect the commander," he tells Ibn Ziyad. "I have some news. I was wandering outside Kufa on my horse when I saw a man speeding out of Kufa heading toward the desert. I did not recognize him as a local because he was from Mecca or Medina. So I caught up with him and asked him about his circumstances. He mentioned that he was from Medina. So I came down from my horse and searched him. I found this letter on him." Right, so he's brought him in as a prisoner, stripped him, took the letter away from him, and he's showing the letter to Ibn Ziyad. Ibn Ziyad read the letter. "In the name of God, the All-Beneficent, the Ever-Merciful, to Hussein bin Ali, I hereby inform you that more than 20,000 of the residents of Kufa have pledged their allegiance to you. When my letter reaches you, then hurry, hurry, for all the people are with you, and they have no desire for Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Wassalam." This is one of the letters that Muslim had sent with the messenger to Imam Hussein. Others got through, this one was intercepted. Ibn Ziyad demanded to see the man who was carrying the letter. At that, Malik brought in Abdullah ibn Yuqtur, who was bound. Ibn Ziyad asked, "Who are you?" He replied, "I am a servant of the house of Hashim." He asked, "What is your name?" He replied, "Abdullah ibn Yuqtur." Ibn Ziyad asked, "Who gave you this letter?" He replied, "A woman whose name I do not know." Right? He didn't want to give the name of Muslim or whoever was the intermediary. Ibn Ziyad laughed and told him, "Choose one of 2 things. Either you shall tell me who gave you this letter, or you shall be killed." Abdullah replied calmly, "As for the letter, I shall not tell you who gave it to me. And as for death, I do not fear it. For I do not know anyone more special to God than one killed by the likes of you." Ibn Ziyad ordered that he be beheaded while still bound. In another narration, Ibn Ziyad ordered him to ascend the pulpit and curse the lying son of a lying father, meaning his master, Imam Hussein, until he decided what to do about him. Right? This common thing, they would tell them to go and curse the Ahlul Bayt. Abdullah ascended the pulpit of Kufa and said, O people, I am a messenger from Al-Hussein, son of Fatima, daughter of the Messenger of God. Aid him and support him against Ibn Marjana, the son of this prostitute Marjana, and the grandson of Sumayya, the bastard son of a bastard father. Ibn Ziyad, infuriated, ordered that he be thrown from atop the governor's palace. When he was thrown, some life remained in him. The judge of Kufa, Abdullah ibn Umayr, approached him and slit his throat. Later, when people criticized the judge for doing so, he offered, I only wanted to ease him of his misery. Ala la'natullahi ala qawmi al-zalimin. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdillah. وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Allah, we ask you to shower your mercy and blessings on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Allah, we ask you to reward us for whatever efforts we've made to commemorate Imam Hussein. Help us to be his true followers and Shia, the Shia of our Imam. Help us to follow in their footsteps, to learn from their example, to live as they lived, and inshallah to die as they died. Help us to live and to support our Imam when he rises and avenges the death of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And help us to learn from the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, to challenge ourselves, to rise to that challenge. Help us to respect our scholars and to benefit from their knowledge and their advice. Forgive us for all of our shortcomings and our sins. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi.